Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. And as I say at the beginning of all my videos recently, oh my gosh, I'm back guys. It's been 4 months, 3 months, 5 months, 10 months, who knows, it's been forever, and I know all of you guys are just ready for the great objectivist philosopher Garrett Mayer to jump back into the YouTube game and start debating all these nihilists and socialists and, well, we'll see. We'll see about that. Some of you guys might be a little disappointed by this video because the main thing I wanted to talk about is, well, I've left this great cave that we call YouTube, and I went out and ventured into the real world, saw some things, looked at reality, integrated a few things together, as the objectivists say these days, and now I'm back to the cave, just to show you guys the light, show you guys the truth. So that you guys can come follow me out of this cave, and really actualize yourselves, really become the person that you are meant to be. Not some crazy ideologue, not some ideologue proselytizing to the YouTube world and just completely letting your brain rot in the cesspool of Discord and YouTube and all that garbage. You can come out and actually look at the real world with me. You don't have to hide in this world of pretending like you know all these principles that you don't actually know, and then every time you see something in the real world that seems to kind of contradict that, you just push it away, pretend it doesn't exist. Don't acknowledge that. That's not real. But anyways, it's been like a minute 30 seconds. Enough with the memes. Let's actually get right into this. If you guys can't tell by the beginning of this video is going to be a bit critical of some of my former positions, my objectivist positions, I guess. So yeah, I guess the main thing that I wanted to talk about was why I don't really consider myself an objectivist anymore. And I guess kind of going into it, I'm not gonna like drill down on all these like points in objectivism. That'll all these like specific points. That's not really the main thing I'm going for here. That's something that will probably get talked about in future videos. I think the main thing that I wanted to create this video for, as I'm sure the title probably references, I haven't come up with a title yet, but I'm sure the title probably references this. This is more a critique of ideology and sort of applied to objectivism. And also I kind of want to apply it to religion as well, because I think there's a lot of parallels between the two. I think a lot of the ways that objectivists talk about ideology is pretty similar to how religious people talk about ideology. So yeah, enough with all this rambling for 3 minutes, if you want to call it that. We're getting the intro out of the way. Hey guys, come on now. Let's start by talking about just a brief disclaimer. I think there's value in Rand's philosophy. I find her ethics extremely convincing. I find a lot of aspects of her epistemology or politics, I think a lot of her principles are generally pretty good. I just think that there's a lot of problems that tie in with a lot of other issues that I realize that I notice with ideologues as well, that Rand seems to fall into, and that a lot of her adherents seem to fall into as well. And it's not necessarily a huge critique of a lot of the higher up intellectuals. I think a lot of them are actually pretty good. They're pretty open-minded, but I still think that they have this corrupting influence of ideology almost. But yeah, let's get right into it. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about, I wrote all these points down. I had them all like kind of not arranged super well in my notepad, and it was just like this sprawling bullet point list of points that I've been coming up with for the past like couple months. So then I guess today I just organized them into a bunch of different categories. So I wanted to start off by talking about how ideologues seek truth, some problems with that, how they react to other philosophies, how they respond to criticism, and that section is going to be shorter, but and then also talking about how ideologues engage in conversation and how all of these things are dangerous. So hopefully this can convince you about some of the dangers of ideology, and I doubt it will, honestly, because some of you guys are very entrenched and probably not very open to criticism. So let's begin by talking about how ideologues seek truth. And one thing that I generally notice, whether it be religious people, whether it be objectivists, when you have a question, when you have some philosophical question, something that you're not super sure about, instead of looking to reality, the first thing that you do is go to the Bible or go to OPAR, the lexicon, anything like that. And I think that's a very damaging thing. I've fallen into this a lot in the past. I think every time I'd have a question about like, oh, free will, am I doubting free will? I'd go into the lexicon, read Ayn Rand stuff until I felt like I understood it, and then almost made myself certain of something that I wasn't super sure about just by like reading it, reiterating it a bunch, and trying to like understand these arguments. And I think this is a really dangerous way to go about learning things. I think it entrenches you in a certain ideology, and it makes it so that you can become certain of something that you haven't actually like seen yet. You haven't actually looked at different facts in reality, integrated them all together to form this thing that you believe is true. I think a lot of times people will put their book their book or their ideology, the principles that they're supposed to believe in, before the actual things that they see in the world. So I think that's a massive problem. It's sort of like a backwards process of learning things. You get your opinions from a text, you get them from an ideology, and then you go into the world and then you start like looking for things that confirm that. And when you're looking for things that confirm a principle that you believe, you're going to find them. You're going to start to selectively focus on those things, and you're going to start to ignore other things. And one thing that I started to notice is that as I got more and more into objectivism, I started being uncomfortable acknowledging things that I would see in reality or feel are true, just because they might contradict some principle that I hold. And I realized once I started like acknowledging those things and not pretending like they don't exist or just not thinking about them very much, objectivism seemed to become a lot less important to me, and I felt like my own thought process was a lot clearer as well. And another actual example of this is my time as a religious person during high school. This was very explicitly the process of thought that we would go through, the going to a book and then confirming those things in reality. We would like have these readings every week, and then we would talk about how we saw certain sentences in those readings in the real world. I think that's like a perfect example of that sort of mentality. And I think objectivism sort of does that too, with the way that they talk about induction, and the way that they talk about verifying their principles. It's like, I guess one specific example would be, was it non-contradiction, or was it causality in one of Peikoff's lectures, where it was like, you have this principle, causality, and then now he's like going on this walk outside to see how all this stuff verifies that. So it's almost this process of verification rather than identification or discovery of something. So I think that is one major problem. It's their method of seeking truth. And also, I don't disagree with causality. I'm more arguing with the method by which he went to get to that fact, if that makes sense. So up next, I wanted to talk about the general ideological, objectivist, religious, name an ideology, the response to other philosophies. And I think the main way that I noticed that, and this is something that I was kind of critical of Rand for, or was starting to become critical of Rand for during my leaving of objectivism, I guess, is the tendency to to hear a phrase from a philosopher or hear about a philosophy or some summary of a philosophy, categorize it into this like neat little box, like, oh, they're a subjectivist, an intrinsicist, or something like that, and then reject it by attaching it to that phrase, and then using Rand's rejection of that word to dismiss it. So, I mean, yeah, let me think of, well, let's say someone says something, and it sounds like subjectivist. It sounds like they're like rejecting principles or something like that. Which, I mean, you could arguably do with the beginning of my video. You could say like, oh, this person is arguing against principles. He doesn't believe that you should hold philosophical principles. Yeah, basically like that. You can say like, oh, he's a pragmatist. And then from there, without actually considering anything else from their ideology, without considering any of the other nuances that they add to it, you use Rand's critique of pragmatism to dismiss it out of hand. And Rand is really good at making these ideologies look completely absurd. But I think a lot of times, if she were to actually encounter someone who believed that ideology, she would realize this person doesn't actually believe these absurd, like, logical conclusions of their position. And I don't necessarily think they're the logical conclusions of the position either. So I think that's one really dangerous tendency. yeah, not necessarily keeping in mind the specifics here, just thinking about this broad tendency that I think of in general. Like, it's the tendency to attach a certain philosopher, a certain phrase, anything like that, to a word or a label that Rand critiques, and then using that critique to reject that person or idea. And I think that is also very prevalent throughout religious thinking, throughout objectivist thinking as well. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about with regard to other philosophies is this idea that I find a lot in ideologies, religion, objectivism, that their ideology, whether like religion, if more people were religious, if more people were objectivists, like this would save the entire world from all these other degenerate ideas that are destroying it. The world is in crisis. There's all these terrible ideas that are all over, flooding our college campuses, flooding our intellectuals, our politicians, all of this. And if people just accepted my ideology, then everything would be better. And I think this completely fails to, or completely disregards the fact that other ideologies may have some value that you're missing, that it completely causes you to selectively focus on your ideology and completely dismiss them out of hand. When they say something, it's like, oh, this is just some corrupt ideology that I don't agree with. I've already rejected this ideology. This is the degenerate ideology that's destroying the world right now. And I think that leads to a sort of closed-mindedness that almost traps you in the position that you already hold. And I think it's extremely effective. I mean, religious people are able to stay religious for a long time, a lot of their lives, and objectivists are able to get really entrenched in their ideology as well. So I think that is a major problem as well with this ideology. It's just the sort of, as I said before, the idea that the world is full of these terrible ideas, and there's this one philosophy, this one that knows the truth and has the answers for all these other philosophies. And if you just accepted this one, the world would be a lot better. So let's move on to the next one. And this is sort of, I titled this section in my notes, Responding to Criticism. And I think that one particular thing that I've heard objectivists say in the past is that Rand and Peikoff have studied a lot longer than you, so how can you, with no philosophical study, criticize them? What authority do you have? You haven't studied this for that long. How could you possibly know? And disregarding the fact that this is like a complete rejection of the fact that you should have to like think about ideas for yourselves and actually have to come to your own conclusions about things, and disregarding that, because that was like a whole other thing. If you actually look at the people who do study philosophy for a living, who have spent the most time studying philosophy, the majority of them completely reject Rand. They laugh at her. They consider her ideas completely devoid of value. And so if I accept that principle that, oh, you should believe Rand and Peikoff because they've been studying these ideas longer than you, then I have every justification to just completely laugh at and dismiss objectivism and consider it just this worthless philosophy. I mean, what serious philosopher believes in objectivism? Why should I distrust the serious philosophers? I don't have much philosophical experience, so it's possible that Rand and Peikoff could just be like tricking me into believing these things that seem right but are just overly simplistic. By that standard of just listening to those who have experience, how can I judge those experts as wrong? How can I judge the philosophical experts of the world as wrong? They know philosophy better than me or you, so I should just listen to them. So I think that criticism almost just completely dispels that argument, I think anyone who still like clings to the argument that Rand and Peikoff just have more experience and I should listen to them, it doesn't make sense. You can think about things for a long time in an incorrect way. You can, I think ideology in general almost promotes that. If you have these certain principles that you only think about them for just a long period of time without ever actually considering them, you begin to think in the context of those principles rather than reality. And that completely frames your thought in a way that just doesn't make sense to anyone who's actually looking at the world and doesn't already accept that framework. With that aside, let's jump into the last topic that I wanted to talk about, which is how ideologues approach conversation. And the main thesis here is I think conversation, actual like fruitful discussion, is completely impossible for ideologues. Every single conversational point that they discuss, they can't actually address the point head on. It seems like when I listen to ideologues talk, whether it be religious people, conservatives, objectivists, socialists, anybody like that, they have to, I guess I shouldn't say conservatives, like very, very far right people. I'm talking about political extremists, or extremists is a dumb word. Just people who have a very pronounced ideology with regard to politics, but whatever, with politics or philosophy in general. They morph every single conversational point into an ideological talking point, causing them to almost completely just lose the plot on what's actually happening in the conversation. You can hear this in a lot of conversations that people have online, and a lot of debates people have online. You can hear how someone will ask a question or make a point, and then this other person doesn't even seem to acknowledge the fact that that point exists, and they immediately jump into like a pre-prepared NPC dialogue tree, just going through like their ideological points. They try to convert everything back to the thesis of whatever their argument is, or some principle or some talking point that they've heard from their philosopher of choice. And I think this is extremely dangerous as well, because it makes conversations with these types of people impossible. They're completely unwilling to acknowledge something that another person is saying, and they only want to consider things from within their ideological framework. And I think in general, one thing that I've noticed is ideologues, they talk to convince, while non-ideologues, they talk to listen and consider other perspectives to help them break out of potential blind spots that they have. Because, I think a very human tendency is to come up with certain conclusions and then try to verify them essentially in reality, which I think is a very dangerous way to go about it. And that, as I explained earlier, leads to you selectively focusing on the sort of things that are going to confirm the principles that you already hold. And I think that ultimately is really dangerous. It's going to lead you to be trapped in this like thought loop essentially for the rest of your entire life. Be trapped in like this mind prison for the rest of your entire life, where you can never actually break out of it because you're unwilling to look at other perspectives, basically. And I think conversation can be a really good way to help you break out of that, because other people, they don't have the same selective focus as you do. They may have focused on something else, and they can help bring to your attention certain blind spots that you might have. Now, one thing I want to add as a disclaimer, this is not saying you have to like blindly accept the stuff other people say because, they might just see something that you don't. No, other people are just as prone to selectively focusing on things that'll verify the things they already believe. So you need to still be very cautious of the things that other people say as well. However, you should consider them. Don't just think that because this thing that they're saying disagrees with your ideology, or they're pointing out a fact that disagrees with a principle that you hold, that they're missing something, or that they're blind to something, or they're making stuff up or lying. No, like listen to it, acknowledge it, and then over time try to, ask more questions about it, maybe if it's in a conversation, or try to present whatever evidence you might have against that, and just sort of see if what they're saying is true, rather than coming into it with the conclusion that that this is contradicting a principle that I hold, so it must be false. And I think to be able to break out of that selective focus, you have to enter a conversation with a desire to learn from other people, to realize that other people have a valid perspective, and that my goal in a conversation is not to convince this other person of something that I believe. My goal is to gain truth. My goal is to see potential blind spots that I might have that other people can point me towards. I don't really think it matters whether you convince other people or not. A lot of that is just going to be on their life. I think Maybe in a political sense, if you want to get something done politically, it's important to convince people. But in general day-to-day life, you're not trying to convince the masses of a political idea so that you can get democratic support for it. You're just trying to have a conversation with somebody, and the main focus of that, I think, should be to better your own life, to improve your own understanding of the world. And I don't think you get that by trying to convince other people. I think you get that by asking them questions, engaging thoughtfully with the ideas that they're presenting. And yeah, engaging critically with them as well. I think that's very important. But yeah, I think in conclusion for all of this, I think the main goal of this video is basically to convince you that, speaking of convincing people, no, basically just to explain what I feel like I've learned in the past like year or so about ideology, what the sort of new things that I've discovered about it, and how it can damage your own ability to discover truth, and it can make it very difficult for you to break out of that ideology too. It puts you almost in this like prison that you constantly, based off of your own very human thought processes, which are not necessarily bad things, but based off of like very human desires, like to convince other people, to verify the truth of things that we believe. Oh geez. Sorry, the camera's like backwards for me, so I'm like trying to fix my hair and then it's like, ooh, wrong way, but whatever. So yeah, I think it makes it very difficult for you to break out of these like thought patterns, this certain ideology. I think it puts you in this prison, and then your own mind is the one that holds you there. There's no guard, there's no people like forcing you to believe this thing. It's a prison by your own making. And I think it's important for you to, if not necessarily break out of it. I mean, I don't fully disagree with a lot of things that Rand says, but I think it's important for you to begin critiquing it a lot more and be willing to dismiss your ideology for whatever reason. If you feel like that there's something else of value in the world that can improve your understanding of truth, improve your understanding of reality. Yeah, I think that's it for what I have to say. So to avoid any extra like concluding rambling, since the video is already like 22 minutes and 50 seconds, and a lot of people don't want to watch a 25-minute video, but fuck it, you're gonna watch it anyways because I said I'm not an objectivist, and for whatever reason you're gonna want to watch it. If you made it this far, hey, you wanted to watch it, there you go. But yeah, to avoid any ending rambling, which I've already kind of done, thank you all for watching. Yeah, I hope this can be the beginning of a new journey on this channel where I can really start getting into actually searching for truth rather than being a dogmatic proselytizer in front of all of you guys about a philosophy who I don't even know if I really fully believe anymore. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Please post whatever criticism you have in the comments. Talk to me on Discord maybe. The Discord server is kind of dead, but if you want to join that, that's down below. We can get it going again, you know? But whatever. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Peace!